I have a very special guest. We'll be having a conversation about something that I think really matters because it brings together two worlds that very rarely get an opportunity to have a conversation. A person like myself living with acromegaly and a CEO of a pharmaceutical company that has developed and brought to market an oral drug that treats it. I am honored to be joined by Scott Struthers, founder and CEO of Crinetics Pharmaceuticals. Crinetics is a global pharmaceutical company known for developing drugs for the treatment of endocrine-related diseases. Scott, welcome to Talking Acromegaly with Tony. I appreciate you joining me today.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me. It's great to talk with you. It's always a pleasure. Always like connecting with a fellow Chicagoan and grandfather. The CEO title's a little weird. I kind of consider myself more of a scientist who just happens to be doing that job.
And you're doing that job very well. Okay, so here's the thing. 2025 was a transformative year for Crinetics, with the major accomplishment coming on September 25th with the FDA approval of Palsonify. Scott, can you explain to viewers what Palsonify is and what receiving that FDA approval has meant for Crinetics?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So Palsonify is a once-a-day pill that does much the same thing as the injected drugs that many acromegaly patients are on that are called somatostatin analogs. That's the things like sandostatin and somatulene. But this is something that we've made that is not what's called a peptide, which is the type of drugs sandostatin and somatulene are. This is a non-peptide, just a typical type of molecule like any other drug you might have to take for blood pressure or lipids or something like that. And but what it does is it goes in and it inhibits the secretion of growth hormone, and it does so in a very consistent and fast way that I think translates to some benefits for folks, apart from just avoiding those massive injections that I know are no fun for anybody. And we've been super pleased by both the data and the response we've gotten now from patients that have started taking it. And what it means for us as a company, I guess, means a variety of different things. But the biggest one is, you work so long and so hard to try and come up with some new medicine. As I think everybody knows, most of the time, those new medicines don't work or they fail for one reason or another. So this is something we've been working on for, 17 years now. Myself, 45 years, because I started working in this field when I was a kid in my first year of college. And so it's just one of those rare moments where, the things you've been working so hard on actually pay off. And then you start hearing back from people that have gotten it and benefited personally. And it's the most rewarding thing in the world, honestly. It's fabulous.
It certainly is fabulous. And I'm one of those who pretty much doesn't like getting the injection. And Palsonify is really something that I was looking forward to. And I'm right now currently on Palsonify. So let me ask you this.
Sure.
How did Palsonify come about? Kind of like the early scientific studies and the clinical trials and such.
Whoa, you got along. I think we've only got an hour in this podcast or something, but I'll give you the short version.
Sounds good.
So Palsonify, by being a non-peptide, is mimicking the action of a naturally occurring hormone called somatostatin. And I got so lucky my freshman year of college, I started working to pay my tuition for Professor Murray Goodman at UC San Diego. And he had this idea that you could take peptides, which are these biological small proteins, and you could turn them into things that were actually more like real drugs. And that idea I started working on in 1980, and it was on somatostatin. Now, fast forward, I worked on that for a few years with him. We made a little bit of progress, but the idea never left. And then I spent quite a bit of time at another company in 1998 to 2008 trying to take that idea that ended up being a drug for women with a disease called endometriosis or uterine fibroids, to take a peptide and make it into a once-a-day drug. And then when we got around to starting Crinetics in 2008, we tried to follow this idea back into the acromegaly space, and we started making these molecules. And what I think people don't realize is you don't just make one molecule. In fact, it took us 808 molecules to get to paltusotine, which later became the name Palsonify. And what you got to do is solve for a whole bunch of different problems. So you got a drug needs to be something that you can formulate into a pill that's small enough that you can take. Needs to survive the stomach acid because that'll chew up a lot of things. It needs to get across the lining of the intestine and not get degraded there. It needs to survive the liver because the blood from the intestine goes to the liver, and the liver's job is to get rid of xenobiotics. And then it needs to get into the circulation and act at the pituitary gland to suppress growth hormone, and it needs to stick around long enough so that it's a once-a-day pill. And then it has to be safe enough that you're not creating some other problem for people. And each of these things you got to test and optimize. And you might get one molecule that does one part well, but then it doesn't do this part, or you might be able to solve two things, but you don't solve the third. And so my co-founder, Frank, calls it the water balloon problem because you squeeze on one end and you get a problem pop out on the other side of the molecule. And so you just keep trying and trying and trying and getting a little better each time. And it took us several years before we found paltusotine or Palsonify. And then the real work starts where you got to start doing clinical trials. And so then we did a phase 1 trial in healthy volunteers and phase 2 trial that was to figure out the doses in acromegaly patients. And then, of course, that's right when the pandemic hit. So we had to figure out how to do clinical trials around the world when the pandemic came about. And then we started 2 phase 3 trials that read out. And one was to see how well it worked in patients who were switching from sandostatin or somatulene and make sure you can maintain their control. And the other trial was for people who weren't being treated at the moment and see what you could do if you could bring them to normal IGF levels and see how you felt for a variety of signs and symptoms of acromegaly. And then you got to spend 6 months writing this all up in thousands of documents for the FDA. And they take a year to review this, and you're talking to them for a year. And then we were very fortunate that, all that worked out, and we got an approval in September 25th of last year. And now we're out there trying to make sure people can get it. So it's been quite a journey.
Yes, it has. Okay, so what does all that mean for the future treatment of acromegaly?
Well, boy, for the future treatment, I think right now it's about getting people to know that Palsonify is out there and making sure they can get access to it and helping people with their insurance or finding physicians and things. But that's kind of the start. For me, the real problem in acromegaly, and maybe you have some opinions on how we can do this, is there's only 19,000 patients in the US who've been diagnosed with acromegaly, and it takes 5 to 10 years to get diagnosed. And so there's probably another 17,000 that haven't been diagnosed. So that's like 36,000 patients total. Actually, patients is a bad word. It's people who are living with acromegaly. It's not just patients. And the problem is, out of all those people, right now, the best drugs are these somatostatin depots and now Palsonify. But there's only 3,000 people taking that. And there's a lot more that either should be on medication, but they're not for whatever reason, or have yet to be diagnosed. So I think our real job now that we've got Palsonify approved, is to improve the care of people who are dealing with acromegaly so that they get in, see their docs, they get a medicine they need, or they get diagnosed sooner before they start having the problems that add up with years of undiagnosed acromegaly. So we got a lot of work ahead of us, but we've got a great start.
Well, I'm doing my part as far as that work is concerned, advocating and hoping to get to the point where doctors do earlier diagnosis so people can get the treatment that they need. I was one of those who it took basically 10 years for my diagnosis. So with
Yeah.
all that said, what makes Palsonify different from other treatment options?
Oh, a variety of things. I mean, the pill versus big injection with a big needle is easy to understand, but that's actually one of the smaller advantages. So when you come out of a pituitary surgery and they decide you need to go on a somatostatin analog, typically you start in the injection. You start for 3 months, then they'll measure your IGF levels, and then you may need to go to a higher dose, and then you'll measure it in 3 months, and then you may need to go to the even higher dose and you'll take another 3 months. So it's like 3 to 9 months before you get to the right dose. And in our clinical trials, we're getting there in 2 to 4 weeks. So you're getting that control very quickly. And I'm getting, just anecdotal reports from patients who are starting to feel better a week or two after they start on the drug. And that's just that speed and getting taken care of sooner is way better. The other thing that's really important is that with these monthly injections, a lot of people have this wearing off of the effect or variability of symptoms throughout the month. And I think it's because of it's either wearing off or maybe the injection wasn't given quite right. And with a once a day pill, you get much more consistent control of the symptoms and the biochemical control of IGF. Um, and so I think those are the biggest differentiators and a great reason why people should try it. But, you know, time to talk to people's doctors. To me, the biggest issue is not just, Palsonify versus the injections. It's people getting the care they need. And too many people have struggled with not proactively advocating for themselves with their physicians. And that's why podcasts like this and other patient to patient communications, people need help learning how to deal with the healthcare system and their doctors. Because if you don't do it, the system's not going to take care of everything for you, unfortunately.
That is true. I've been on an injectable, and I have definitely had wear off from my 28-day injection. Mine typically wears off at about day 25.
Yeah.
So, fortunately for me, as of Christmas Day, I started on Palsonify,
Christmas Day.
and I started on Palsonify Christmas Day.
Merry Christmas.
The
That's awesome.
Palsonify was my Christmas present. Yeah, it was. And I can say that personally, it has worked thus far, and I do feel better. And I'm thankful for the work you guys have put in to get it to where it is. That being said, do you envision a future with fewer injections or even oral therapies becoming a standard?
Yeah, well, that's one of the greatest Christmas presents I've had, Tony. So thanks for telling me that. And no, the rumors that we have a distribution deal with Santa are not true. We have traditional marketing. Um, but yeah, I guess I look at it as, we showed in clinical trials that it does just as well as the injections in controlling the disease on a biochemical basis, and maybe even a little better on a symptom basis. So, I don't understand why anybody would want to choose the injection over a pill you take in the morning. Maybe there's one or two situations, but so I see long term that I hope I hope people look at the option of switching to Palsonify. But even more importantly, I hope people who see this and maybe have given up on the injections come back and start taking care of themselves better. Because just, getting by without treating acromegaly that's active is not doing any good for your long-term health. And there's just too many people out there that are not getting the care that they need. And so that's I think the biggest challenge.
And I personally have friends who aren't getting the care. And you talk about the amount of people who actually have acromegaly, and it's not a lot. So with that being said, what originally motivated Crinetics to focus on endocrinology and rare disease? I'm personally thankful that you did. However, what made those the focus?
Well, it's kind of just what I do. So, like I said, I started working in endocrinology when I was 18 years old. And I've from there, I've learned some other things like a little bit of oncology and a little bit of gastroenterology and things. But um, the origins were that's what we knew how to do. But the other thing about endocrinology is that endocrine systems and hormones, and there's lots of different types of hormones, they control aspects of every single cell in the body, and they influence how things happen between, obviously growth, which we all know about from the acromegaly side, but reproduction, how we respond to stress, how we metabolize. They can help cause tumors, so they can be used. Those tools of endocrinology can be used to treat tumors. So endocrinology allows you to, from a scientist point of view and a drug developer point of view, intervene in all kinds of different things that can go wrong in the human body. And so it allows us to really make an impact, even though you may think of endocrinology as a small niche. But in reality, most folks my age are on blood pressure meds. All those blood pressure meds that our primary care doctors give us, we came out of cardiorenal endocrinology. The drugs women take for menopause or fertility or breast cancer or men for prostate cancer all came out of reproductive endocrinology. So endocrinology touches everything, and it's just a wonderfully interesting field that has the ability to have a lot of impact.
That's interesting. Can you unpack that just a little bit more?
Sure. What dimension do you want me to go? In
As
terms
far
of,
as specifically men.
yeah. Well, so like the prostate gland you don't think of it as an endocrine gland, but it's a target of testosterone. And so for prostate cancer, and this is something I was working on before, one of the ways you treat prostate cancer is you block the action of testosterone at the prostate. There's another condition men have called prostate hyperplasia, which makes it difficult to urinate. It's an overgrowth of the prostate that's not it's not cancerous, but it gets big and it blocks the flow of urine. And you treat that by lowering local active testosterone concentrations. And then the more common one that I think now everybody knows about are the GLP-1s for weight loss and diabetes. Well, these are just peptide hormones that act at the pancreas and other places to control how we metabolize and how we react to taking a meal. And those have been optimized or adjusted so that they can be used as a drug to control weight loss, or they're very effective for diabetes as well. But that's all endocrinology.
You've got a lot going on, and you guys are helping and looking to help a lot of people. On that note, I'd like to switch gears a little bit. Crinetics right now has well over 400 employees. And, and kind of often 500 employees, excuse me.
700. It's crazy. I can't believe
700. Wow, you've
Yeah.
had some tremendous growth.
Yeah.
And with that being said, oftentimes pharmaceutical companies, you guys get a bad rap. However, I think your story is truly amazing because you literally built your company from the ground up. Can you talk a little bit about the humble beginnings of Crinetics and take us to where you are as a company now?
Yeah, it's almost a classic story of a California garage startup. So in the end of 2008, and remember, this is like the financial crisis, the housing crisis. This was tough times. I quit a pretty decent job at another biotech where I was a mid-level manager doing drug discovery on that women's health project I talked about a minute ago, and decided to start Crinetics. And we didn't have any money at all. And there was no money in the financial markets. So it was me and 3 friends that worked with me started putting this together. So there's 4 of us and 2 dogs. And my other friends in town knew we were trying to start a company, and their businesses were closing because of the financial crisis. So they just gave us their extra stuff that, there's lab supplies or equipment or trash cans or refrigerator. And we just kept them in our garages until there was no more room in the garages while we're trying to get enough money to open a small lab. And then we got a research grant for $200,000 that let us open a lab on a month-to-month basis and start doing some of this work. And so from 2008 until 2015, we made it work on our own money and a little bit of government grants. Just kind of struggled along. Three of us didn't take a salary for a couple years. The youngest one, she didn't quite have the resources to go without a salary. So we paid her first, and then we paid ourselves a little bit, and then a little bit more. But in 2015, then we got on the mainstream track, and several of what are called venture capitalists, these are early investors in early companies, gave us $30 million to really get going on Palsonify. And that allowed us to get into the clinic and generate some data in healthy volunteers, which allowed us to do some additional financing. We did a initial public offering and got on the stock exchange in 2018, which allowed us to raise more money, which allowed us to start working on things for beyond acromegaly. And then we went into the pandemic in 2020 with 63 people. And that was a pretty remarkable whole story in itself. But we just kept growing. And now with all these other drugs we're working on and trying to get Palsonify available to people in the US, and we're working on approval in Europe and South America. So that's why we're up to now about 700 paid people in the company with a lot of open positions. So if anybody out there is looking to work at a company like ours, look at our job posting site. We got quite a few positions all around the country and in other countries open.
You are definitely living the American dream. That leads me into my next question. As you know, I had the opportunity to visit your Crinetics campus earlier this year, and what I noticed while there, I saw something that I call the Crinetics culture. It was a work environment that seemed extremely pleasant to be a part of. On top of that, I saw a lot of dogs.
Yeah.
Can you explain the work culture and the work environment that you've developed there?
Yeah, well, when we started the company, there was four of us and two dogs. And Steve, my co-founder, his dog was a new pup and didn't want to leave him at home. So he brought him to work. Why not? Nobody's going to tell us not to. So I started bringing in my dog, and then as other people joined, they'd bring in their dog if it was a good day for it. And so we've just been a dog-friendly workplace since forever, and it's kind of nice to take a break and take your dog out back or down the hall and visit, and it does create kind of a informal atmosphere, which I think is very helpful. But and I got to thank you and the other folks that are patients that are working in patients with diseases that we're working on. Because when you and these others visit and people can see firsthand what the impact of their work is, and hear what it really is needed out there. It's not just the things we think about as kind of a scientific point of view. There's some very practical aspects of what people face on a day-to-day basis. That helps us do a better job at both making the drugs and developing them. But it also gives you that extra motivation when you're working on a Saturday night in the lab, because, the lab doesn't stop. Things are growing in there and that need taken care of on weekends and nights, and gives that extra little motivation to know what you're doing is actually making a difference to somebody real, not somebody theoretical. So it was very impactful for you and for us when you and others come out and visit us.
And I appreciate the invite. And if I was in the pharmaceutical field, I would most definitely like to work at Crinetics. That was the first time we met. And at that point, I was pleasantly surprised that you're a very down-to-earth, very approachable CEO. God, what keeps you so grounded?
Well, my wife's in the next hall and in the next room, and she wouldn't let me get too big of a head on my shoulders. But like I said, I never really think of myself as a CEO. I mean, it's my job, but I'm a scientist who's just trying to figure out a way to do the science that I think is needed and that's important. Um, and I don't know. People get a big head on their shoulders for no particular reason, and I just don't subscribe to it. It's not the way I was brought up on the far south side of Chicago.
Let me switch gears back to acromegaly, for myself in particular, as someone living with acromegaly, who's kind of been through surgery, medication, and long-term management. What do you think that pharma leaders like yourself most need to hear from patients like me?
At this point, now that we've got Palsonify on the market, I think there's two big problems. One is, what are the challenges people are facing in actually getting access to good medical care? And then once they get that, whatever the best medical care we have to offer, what's left? Is it really solving everything, or is there still some aspects that need management? And I know, for example, that somatostatin analogs won't fully control some people. So what do we need to do next? And we're thinking about that as well, right? So I think Palsonify gets most people way better than they are without it, but there's still some work to do. And we're looking at what other drugs we might make for acromegaly, for example.
Okay. With that being said, let me ask you this, and you talked about patients. What is
Mhm.
Crinetics doing to help patients advocate for themselves?
Well, I'd encourage anybody who has acromegaly to go to crineticaire.com. We've got nurses on staff that are there to talk and help. There's a doc finder on there. Once you get a prescription and enroll, they can help you deal with your insurance companies or help your physician figure out how to deal with insurance companies. Um, so I think that's a great group, and we're trying to make sure that we improve not just the medicine, but the delivery of healthcare, which is obviously in these days, that's a hard problem, but I think it's our job.
I can attest to the people at CrinetiCare.com. They've been doing a great job and helped me receive my Christmas present. I can actually
Yeah.
attest to that.
Yeah. I heard
I,
there was
I,
some mix up, but they helped resolve there. Which,
they did.
that's great.
I got to switch gears one more time and talk about something uh, that is important to a lot of people because I understand the necessity and the importance of clinical trials. However,
Mhm.
everyone doesn't. How do you address that with patients about risk, trust, and transparency in clinical trials?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's culturally different from country to country. And I got to say, the US is one of the most skeptical about participating in clinical trials. People in other countries are much more receptive to being a part of it. Um, so, a clinical trial is a very controlled way of determining whether a drug is safe and effective, or actually generating the evidence that we then submit to the FDA, who then, from their opinion, determines whether you showed whether a drug is safe or effective or not. And that allows you to market the drug. It's the best system in the world. It's got its problems, but it makes sure that you're not getting snake oil. And in a clinical trial, before any human gets the first very, very low dose of a new possible drug, we've done a ton of work to make sure it's safe and works the way we think. And so then you start in these what are called first in human or phase one trials at a very, very low dose, way lower than what you'd expect. So when we did the first trial of Palsonify, the first dose was 1.25 milligrams. And now the approved doses are 40 and 60 milligrams. So you can see how cautious we were in the beginning. And then you gradually go up in dose, and then you gradually go longer and longer in studies, and then more and more people. And you're always watching very carefully to see if it's safe and if it's working. And what it allows the company to do is to make sure they deliver something that is really going to be useful for larger numbers of people. And for the participants, uh, I think it does a couple things. One, it is the way that medicine moves forward, and you're just helping the world by making sure that new medicines are available. There's no other way to do this. People say AI is going to solve it and you'll just push a button. That's not going to happen. You got to try it in real people because you never know what's going on until it's been in lots of people and you make sure it's safe and effective. Um, but then the other advantage is in clinical trials, you're getting access to the cutting edge of what medicine and the science behind it thinks is the best new treatment for whatever condition you're dealing with. And I can tell you that, the we've got patients now that have been on Palsonify since the beginning of phase 2, and they've been on almost 5 years. So they had access to this drug, which is, I think, a real improvement in treatment 5 years before everybody else, because they took that chance. And it's some work, right? You got to go into these office visits, maybe every month or every 3 months. So you got to find time for it. And a lot of people can't do that because of, their job situation or something. But, you move forward the practice of medicine and you're getting the best possible meds yourself early on. I don't know. I think it's a valuable thing for both the patient and the community.
I have friends that were a part of the Palsonify clinical trials, and they're very thankful that they did participate in it. Let me ask you this. What's one thing you wish patients knew about pharmaceutical development that isn't well known or misunderstood?
Oh, I think the biggest problem, the misunderstanding is they think that it's all about the money, and it's not, right? Uh, if it were all about the money, why in the world would I quit a high-paying job to take a risk that probably wouldn't have paid off, right? I mean, we got pretty lucky and it did. Scientists are not the highest paid people in the world. We make a good living, don't get me wrong, but if it were about the money, you should go to Wall Street or be a lawyer or something. There's a lot of people who just want to either be helpful or to solve some scientific problem, or are just very interested, have a personal interest in the disease state. I mean, we now have a lot of folks in our company, now that we're bigger, who either they have a disease we're working on, and so it's personal, or they have a family member and it's personal. And I think that all this drug development is very personal, certainly personal to somebody, right? But it's also personal to the people that are working on it. So that's the biggest misunderstanding.
You're
Yeah.
talking about personal. This is personal for me. As I started my role as an advocate for acromegaly, I found it very important to encourage, uplift, and inspire others because it was a struggle for me early on. And I wanted to be the voice for others that I needed. And through this podcast, I'm hoping to make a connection with people who were once in the position that I was in. So, with that being said, Scott's founder, CEO of Crinetics Pharmaceuticals. Thank you for talking acromegaly with Tony. It was a pleasure having you today.
Thanks, Tony. It's a pleasure talking to you. And let's get the word out so that folks who have acromegaly know that they need to take care of it. Talk to their doc, call crineticare.com or email them, or, take care of yourselves, because it doesn't do anybody any good if you're not out there taking care of yourself, because otherwise, what's the point of all this, right?
And that's our call to action. Thank you. Much success moving forward. And I'll close with this. Living with acromegaly can sometimes feel like you're stuck managing yesterday's solutions while waiting on tomorrow's breakthroughs. What gives me hope is knowing that there are people, scientists, clinicians, and yes, CEOs working every day to rethink this disease and how it's treated. But progress only works when patients are a part of the conversation. So here's my ask to those of you who are living with acromegaly or any other type of rare disease for that matter. Talk to your healthcare team, ask what's new, ask what's coming, ask if a clinical trial might be right for you. Even asking the question is a step forward. Stay connected, stay informed, and keep advocating for the quality of life you deserve, not just a number on the chart. Thanks for hanging with me today. If you found interest in this episode, drop a comment, share it, like it, and hit that subscribe button. And specifically for those of you who have acromegaly, do me a favor and share your diagnosis date in the comments. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay strong, and be encouraged.